During the 1960s, America saw the most tumultuous series of political assassinations in its history. Within 5 short years, the country witnessed the deaths of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the most influential civil rights and African American leader of the century, Martin Luther King Jr. Each tragedy was etched into public consciousness through the immediacy of electronic broadcast. For a half-century, another potential assassination from that era has been presented to the American public and the world as a freak accident. What really happened to one of history's most celebrated and controversial mystics and ecclesiastical thinkers? We examine the curious passing of Thomas Father Louis Merton on this edition of the Memory Hole Blog Report. For Memory Hole Blog Report, this is James Tracy. In his renowned autobiography, The Seven-Story Mountain, Thomas Merton describes his emerging spirituality and conversion to Catholicism while attending Columbia University. In 1941, at the age of 26, he entered a Trappist monastery in Kentucky. Merton would remain there for 27 years while authoring over 70 books on poetry, Christian mysticism, the contemplative life, social criticism, and the existential possibility of nuclear war. Many of these works became bestsellers and inspired countless thousands to pursue their own spiritual paths. Through his writings, Merton has exerted an enduring influence on an international scale. Yet, like Dr. King in particular, Merton was an early critic of U.S. foreign policy, and he almost certainly became a potential target for what he termed the warfare state. In a series of correspondences with high-profile political leaders and celebrities during the early 1960s, Merton declared how America's national policy vis-a-vis other nations is built on affluence, the obsessions of the military, and the phobias of political extremists. In a set of observations that are as apt today as they were at the height of the Cold War, he pointed to how the people of the country are by and large reduced to passivity, confusion, resentment, frustration, thoughtlessness, and ignorance, so that they blindly follow any line that is unraveled for them by the mass media. In his poem invoking the Holocaust, Chant to be used in processions around the site with furnaces, Merton wrote, "Do not think yourself better because you burn up friends and enemies with long-range missiles without ever seeing what you have done." Merton even directed 2 letters critical of the Vietnam War directly to President Lyndon Johnson. As the historical record attests, Johnson became infuriated when Martin Luther King took a public stance against Vietnam in his April 4, 1967 Riverside Church speech, exactly 1 year before his assassination. Months after the deaths of King and Robert Kennedy, Thomas Merton was on a rare trip abroad, attending a monastic summit in Bangkok, Thailand. After giving an afternoon presentation on December 10, 1968, he retired to his quarters. Shortly thereafter, his body was found with several cuts and multiple severe burns across the right side of his face. To this day, the official story maintains that Merton was killed while exiting a bathtub, losing his balance and grabbing a standing electric fan, the faulty wiring of which short-circuited and electrocuted him. Photos taken at the scene show that the faulty fan was found laying across his body and at the time still running. This narrative ignores what Thai police investigators and other observers reported as a gaping wound at the rear of the priest's head that was bleeding profusely. Yet, at the recommendation of the U.S. Embassy in Bangkok, no autopsy was ever conducted. In their 2018 book, The Martyrdom of Thomas Merton, authors Hugh Turley and David Martin lay out compelling evidence that calls into question the official story of Merton's accidental electrocution. Turley and Martin contend that this story was likely fabricated by the U.S. Embassy, in part to conceal the real culprits behind Merton's death. This argument would help explain the obvious head wound observed at the scene that the electrocution scenario cannot account for. Theologian and author Matthew Fox has carefully researched Merton's death and spoken to former CIA officers deployed to Thailand in the late 1960s. Upon being asked of agency involvement in Merton's unusual death, one said, "I will neither affirm it nor deny it." Another agent, however, was much more forthcoming. When Fox asked, "Did you guys kill Merton?" he responded, "Yes," adding, "The last 40 years of my life I have been cleansing my soul from the actions I was involved in the name of the CIA in Southeast Asia as a young man." To this day, there is no small degree of consternation among Catholic opinion leaders over the emerging controversy surrounding Merton's death. Upon the event's 50th anniversary, well-known writer Patricia Lefebvre submitted an article to the prominent National Catholic Reporter on Merton's death. The piece drew on Turley and Martin's volume and highlighted the evidence supporting the probability of Merton's assassination. The editors at National Catholic Reporter refused to carry the article. Perhaps Thomas Merton would not want for us to continue to dwell on his death 50 years after the fact. Yet in 2019, the world remains a very long way from achieving the peace he had hoped for, and he consistently emphasized truth as a bedrock principle for a peaceful world. Peace demands the most heroic labor and the most difficult sacrifice, Merton wrote. It demands greater heroism than war. It demands greater fidelity to the truth and a much more perfect purity of conscience. Over the last 50 years, the bid for this very fidelity has resulted in a wealth of accumulated research into the deaths of the Kennedys and Dr. King. That work weighs heavily against the state-endorsed storylines on each of those assassinations. The investigation of Thomas Father Louis Merton's tragic and untimely demise has only just begun. If you find this material of value, please like the video, provide your helpful commentary below, and politely tap the subscribe button to this channel. And also, please consider becoming a sponsor of Memory Hole Blog Report and Memory Hole Blog on our Patreon. As always, we may be found at memoryholeblog.org. This is James Tracy.